Hey everyone, and welcome to my Pyke guide. I've been wanting to make this video for a while because I just love this champion. Pyke can make playing League of Legends beautiful. In my opinion, he is the highest skill ceiling support in the game. You can really create art with Pyke at his highest level.
How do you watch a Pyke montage and not want to learn him? This video can help you do just that.
We're going to start by talking about matchups. Now, Pyke is the strongest early game support in the game, no questions asked. I would argue that he's actually the strongest champion in the entire game at level 2, with his Q, with his E, and with the Hail of Blades if he opts in for that rune. He is also fantastic at roaming, so great early game, 2v2 and great roaming. Where does this leave us? He can kill bot with practically any ADC pairing at level 2 and onwards. He can do all of the heavy lifting there. He can also roam when bot doesn't go our way or we don't have that appropriate kill threat. So, Pyke can function and excel in practically any early game. He is also very independent, so your teammates' champs aren't as relevant as for other supports. He can provide the damage and the CC himself. However, all-in ADCs, like Samira, like Kai'Sa, like Tristana, maybe Kalista, maybe Nyla, they can be great to blow up the game, but they're not necessary. He can pair with those utility set-up ADCs like these. He can even pair up with the slow ADCs, Ezreal, Vayne, Zeri, and go and roam. So the main matchups to watch out for are from the enemy champions, who may have tools to negate his ult or just be really mobile and hard to land. Tools to negate his ult, you can think of champions like Lulu ults, like Zillion ults, like Soraka ults, like Fizz's E, like Vlad's W. This is going to make his job harder to actually find these kills. And then in terms of mobile enemies, because Pyke is so skill shot reliant, you need to land your Q, you need to land your E, even your ult is a skill shot. Typically, mobile enemies will make your life harder. It'll be harder to execute your champion, and these are going to be found in the mid and the jungle primarily. Champions like Kiana, like LeBlanc, like Kindred, like Nidalee, like Zed, etc. The occasional mobile ADC like Ezreal or Lucian, but typically from mid and jungle. Now, we can play around this mobility. We can potentially wait until they use the mobility, or we can predict their mobility, or we can use our flash to lock it down. Things like that, we can always be problem solvers, but it is tougher to play out versus mobility. At the end of the day, Pyke's strength is up to you and your mastery of him. Will you make the most out of his kit and land his skill shots or not? It's black and white in that regard. I do want to say that because he is such a strong early game champion and solo queue games are typically rather chaotic, he is a timeless support pick for solo queue. He's very likely to be able to find windows to find kills and to tilt the enemy just from being really obnoxious and strong early on. Let's talk about runes now, and this is a champion that can have quite a lot of personal preference in terms of rune setup. What you can do is you can run Aftershock to negate burst after jumping in. You'd want to consider this rune versus champs maybe like Leona, or when you verse Kate Lux, you're going to jump in, then you're going to get rooted and chain CC'd. Potentially burst. Champions like Kai'Sa or Tristana could potentially add to the argument of taking Aftershock. Maybe you just like to be a little bit tankier and not get one shot, which can be Pyke's weakness. So let's have a look at, if we do go Aftershock, what we want to back it up with. We're going to want to go Font of Life, and then most likely Bone Plating into Unflinching. Now, there is an argument to be made for Second Wind in some matchups. I personally don't like taking Second Wind. I know some other players do, but with Pyke's passive and allowing him to regen his HP when he is out of vision, that's kind of like a second win in and of itself. And if you want to go this page, that's because you're worried about getting burst out, right? And that's what Bone Plating is there for. That's what it's designed for. And then Unflinching for the same kind of logic, right? If you're going this setup to try and survive these burst trades, then you want the Unflinching for the Lux Q, for the Leona E, for whatever it may be. If you just like to be more defensive, then you can also go the Revitalize if you're not picking it in a lane where you need that tenacity. What you can also do is you can run Hail of Blades. Now, this is by far the most common keystone. The reason that Hail of Blades is so excellent on Pyke is because he has so much AD and he is so strong early. It just complements his champion very well. His passive makes him squishier, but just converts all of his bonus health into AD. And he is going to find windows to proc his Hail of Blades in 2v2 all-ins to be really scary. In messy skirmishes, outside of bot lane, so that he can, help out and find those kills as well. And then even in the mid to late game, when he has a lot of damage, the Hail of Blades can really allow his damage to put the enemy in his execute range for his ult. So this is the most popular, and this is the one that you would probably just want to go in most situations if you're not really comfortable and thinking about which rune to go when. Okay, let's talk about the main page setup now for the Hail of Blades, what we can do. So there is quite a lot of personal preference even for this branch alone. You can go Taste of Blood to keep yourself a little bit healthier. I personally go Cheap Shot so that I can find those early kills, which he excels at. And then Zombie Ward is an absolute must. This is just too broken, especially paired with Umbral Glaive, which we're going to be talking about later in the item section. Zombie Ward is just ridiculously OP, oppressive, and really easy to proc with Pyke. And then for the last tree, we're going to choose between Relentless and Ulti Hunter. Now, what I personally have started to favor is the Relentless Hunter. What is important is that you have both mobility and ability haste for your ultimate. So what you probably would want to avoid is going Relentless Hunter and Moby Boots, because then you're just not going to have much cooldown reduction for your ult. You also would want to avoid going Ulti Hunter with Lucidity Boots, because then you just have no mobility from your runes or your items. So to really go in depth about this branch is going to need to pair with items. And so we're going to talk about that in the item section. But for the most part, I'm going to go Relentless Hunter with Lucidity. I forgot to mention, but the reason that we can also consider Sudden Impact is because he has a lot of dashes. He has that stealth. It grants him lethality, and he has insane scaling with lethality. His W move speed scales off it. His E stun duration even scales off of it, and his ult execution range. And so this would be a little bit more of a scaling rune in the mid game. This is going to come online a lot more. Cheap Shot is really good for all-ins 2v2, and then this is more for like sustained, but it's still really good in the early game. Now, the last option that I want to talk about for the Keystone is Glacial Augment, and this is to provide a little bit of utility. This can kind of be like a jack of all trades. You're going to still have some kill threat in the bot lane because the Glacial Slow is going to go a long way. You're also going to have more utility in the mid to late game, so if you don't snowball too hard early on, then you can still have that CC throughout the game. And then filling out the Glacial Augment page, we are going to go Glacial Augment. We're never going to want to go Magical Footwear. You need to rush tier 2 boots on Pyke. He is exceptionally mobile. His E needs mobility built in of itself, and so we're probably going to go Stopwatch almost every time in this branch. And then here we have a little bit of flexibility. Now, I personally will go Futures Market pretty much 10 times out of 10 here. Getting those tier 2 boot spike as early as possible, even stacking Dirks because they're quite affordable and give him huge power spikes. This is why I would want to go Futures. You can potentially go DMAT if you want to just one-shot a few cannons and get a lot of prio in the early lane. I would rather grade for the Futures. And then we're going to go Cosmic Insight 10 times out of 10 on the bottom branch. The reason that Cosmic Insight is so important is because you can have your flash up more often, especially if you're trading flashes with the enemy carries and they don't have Cosmic Insight, then you're going to have a 45-second window to punish that, right? But you're going to be wanting to use your flash a lot to set up your plays. And now in terms of the item haste, this is actually a really big deal for Pyke. So the item haste works for Sweeper so that you can sweep more, get more zombie wards out. It works for Umbral Glaive, so that is going to be up more often, so you can be more obnoxious and create fog. It's also going to work for Prowler's Claw, so that you can have that reliable setup. We'll talk about this later, but Prowler's Claw is a fantastic item on Pyke. And it can also work for, the mid to late game items that you may build. More of Malmortius, Guardian Angel. This is a lot of synergy with the items and the way that Pyke wants to play the game. Okay, so I want to talk about secondary runes for a second here. And the first thing I want to talk about is how much flexibility that Pyke can have with secondary runes. He can practically run any tree as a secondary. He can go Precision. If he wants to go for some Tenacity, he can go Triumph and Tenacity. Especially if your games are fast-paced or the comps that you are playing in look like they are going to be quite fast-paced, then the Triumph can give a lot of value in those fights to stay alive. And then the Tenacity speaks for itself. If you verse a lot of CC, this can go a long way as well. The next page that I'm going to talk about is Sorcery Secondary. Now, even in this page alone, there can be a lot of personal preference. What you can do is go Nimbus and Celerity. So Nimbus in terms of giving you that extra speed, once again, to set up your E more reliably, or even to chase people down, or to get more people in your stun. This can be surprisingly effective, paired with Celerity, of course. That's going to amplify the move speed from the Nimbus, and you're just a very mobile champion in general, so that's always going to give value. You can even run Scorch. Now, this might sound really strange. It was buffed in the not too distant past, and it does allow you to get more damage out in your early all-ins, right? You have the cheap shot damage, you have the scorched damage. We can also consider water walking for that secondary in the sorcery page. And so you have these 4 runes realistically to choose from. Celerity Water Walking will synergize well. Celerity Nimbus Cloak will synergize well at the same time. Moving on to Resolve secondary, this is going to be if you feel like you need some survivability. If you see a lot of champions on the enemy comp that have burst, and you really want to be able to survive that, then this is what you would go for. You would want to go for the bone plating and the unflinching. You're scared of getting locked down and you're scared of getting one shot. That is Pyke's weakness, and so this secondary rune page does make a lot of sense. It's not necessary, but you definitely can run this when you feel like you need the survivability. And now the last secondary rune page, and one of the most common and my personal favorite, Inspiration secondary. Cosmic Insight, as we talked about before, it is just so incredibly valuable for Pyke to have all of that item haste, as well as having that flash cooldown, especially if you're building Lucidities, right? So if you go Relentless Hunter plus Lucidities, and if you get this Cosmic Insight, your flash is such a short cooldown. It's such an important tool for you to have to make consistent plays. Paired on top of all of that item haste, it's really hard to not take this. So you want to make a pretty strong argument if you do dip into one of these trees for secondary, why you like that feel more than this setup. And what we're going to pair this with is probably Stopwatch. Now, the lower elo you are, the less I would recommend Stopwatch. It is a skill in and of itself to use Stopwatch well. So many times, I mean, I'm sure you guys can even picture in pro games where pro players are just wasting Stopwatch, using it randomly. And so if you're a little bit hesitant about using Stopwatch, you can go to the futures market to get those boots, to get those dirks, to stack that lethality a little bit faster. But I would say Diamond Plus, start to consider Stopwatch. It can give so much value if used well. It can provide you with a dive opportunity that you might otherwise not have. It can really turn around a skirmish, so keep that in mind. Now, the reason that I wanted to start talking about the secondary trees while we're on the domination primary is because this champ needs Zombie Ward and one of these two. So what we wouldn't want to do, let's say we're taking that Aftershock page, right? What we wouldn't want to do is then dip into this for Pyke. He needs that zombie. It is far too powerful and oppressive. He needs that relentless or the ulti so that he can have some of that mobility to move around. And so pretty much if you're deciding to go for the Aftershock tree as a primary, then we're going to want to back it up with this. And the same thing if we want to go the Glacial tree primary, then what we're going to have to do is back it up with this. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of the rune pages is that the Glacial tree and the Aftershock tree can be kind of training wheels. While you're feeling out Pyke, learning his limits, what you can and can't do, having that extra utility or survivability, can help in terms of not losing your confidence too fast. Otherwise, I really recommend for you guys to just have a play, have a feel for yourself. Ask yourself what runes actually achieve and then try to, accomplish those in your games. Do you prefer having a lot of mobility? Do you prefer having a low ulti cooldown? Do you like having that one-shot assassination potential? Are you more defensive-minded and you want to go for the Glacial of the Aftershock? See what works for you with your personality, with your playstyle and your games that you experience. Now, wrapping up this section, we're going to quickly talk about the rune shards. Now, what you might expect is for me to say 10 times out of 10 go this. There is an argument to be made for going attack speed. Hail of Blades can't get capped. It allows you to exceed the attack speed limit. So in the early game, giving this attack speed, scaling alongside Pyke's additional AD can give more initial damage. However, I don't think that you should go this too often. I would say probably 9 times out of 10, I would go double adaptive. Especially when you have Umbral Glaive up, you don't really need the attack speed to clear out wards faster. You really want to get as much damage as possible. But in the early game, it can help out a little bit. And so that's another thing you can consider, right? If you really, really like those level 2 all-ins and you want to index into that as much as humanly possible, then you could potentially do something like this. You have the extra attack speed, you have the cheap shot, you have the Scorch, you have the Nimbus to catch up. Okay, let's move on to Pyke's items. Now we're going to start with Steel Shoulder Guards for the initial support item. And then there are going to be 2 main build paths that we want to go, the lethality and the utility build path. Now, let's start with the lethality. And I want to start by talking about how well Pyke scales with lethality. I mentioned that he has scaling with his W move speed, his E stun duration, his alt execute range. It's even with his passive in terms of how much damage he takes that gets converted to his grey health. So it's obvious that Riot really incentivizes us to build lethality on him, and lethality is very easy to stack on Pyke. Because he gets so much gold from his ult, and because Dirks are quite affordable and give large spikes in and of themselves, this is just a build path that makes a lot of sense for Pyke. Now, let's start with the boots. So I mentioned earlier about Lucidity boots with Relentless or Moby boots with Ulti Hunter. I think Pyke is the only support in the game, or even the only champion in the game, who can actually make quite good use of Moby boots. However, it is more expensive than Lucidity's, and Lucidity's, given that summoner and item haste, is just so incredibly valuable. So I would encourage you to stick with the Lucidity boots with Relentless Hunter for now. And then in terms of the lethality items that we want to be building, Umbral Glaive, this is just such a broken item. It synergizes so well with Zombie Ward, with Pyke moving around, being mobile, being slippery, being independent. And this item can just solo carry the entire mid to late game for Pyke. Even if he's behind, even if he can't really provide much in a front-to-back 5v5 team fight, he can always be moving around and creating fog of war for your team. It's also very affordable and gives lethality, so just a perfect item for Pyke. And then we're going to want to opt into the Mythic. Now, there are some Duskblades. I'm not a fan of Duskblade. I think that Prowler's Claw is just far too important for Pyke to have some guaranteed engage. Now, normally with Pyke, unless you have Flash, it's very hard to land your E, especially if you're trying to be a primary initiator. That extra dash, that point and click from the Prowlers to lock onto a target and move past them, and then your E stuns them, so important to reduce some of the variability that you're going to notice with playing Pyke. However, there are a couple of Pyke players around the world that prefer Duskblade, and this is so that he can briefly go invisible after finding a kill to help him stay alive and look for that next kill or get out. Him briefly going invisible can also synergize with his passive so that he can start healing. But as I said, Prowler's Claw is just far too important for him, in my opinion. And so after these two primary lethality items that we need for Pyke, it's going to be thinking about which is the next lethality item that might be useful. Edge of Night gives lethality and gives you that shield. And one of Pyke's biggest weaknesses is getting caught out, getting locked down, getting one shot, because he just can't build any reliable tankiness. And so if you're versing quite a lot of threat, then you can consider this. Let's picture a Maokai. He can never flash W onto you here. Maybe you can think of an Elise or just any engaged support. There's always going to be threat, maybe long range stuns as well, like an Ashe ult. If you have the Edge of Night passive up, you're very hard to kill. And so we can choose between that. We can also choose Yomu's Ghostblade. Now, this is quite an underrated item, in my opinion. This gives a lot of lethality, and it also gives out-of-combat movement speed, which is not very well known. Everyone knows about the active moving faster, but it gives a lot of out-of-combat movement speed, which, of course, synergizes really well with Pyke as his identity in terms of roaming around, especially in the mid to late game. Now, the last situational lethality item that we're going to talk about is Axiom Arc, and this can be quite oppressive. Having uptime on his ult, he's a very different champion between when he has ult and when he doesn't. And the cool thing about this item is that in an extended fight, if you get multiple ults off, you can even get 2 ults in a row, which is crazy. Now, for the very last items, we're going to be talking about Death's Dance and Guardian Angel and More of Malmortius. Now, for Guardian Angel and More of Malmortius, they do also scale with the item haste that Lucidity Boots can bring, which is what I mentioned earlier. Guardian Angel should hopefully be self-evident. It helps you to not get one-shot, which is Pyke's weakness. More of Malmortius, again, giving you some of that survivability. And also, the shields scales off of your AD, which Pyke is obviously going to have a lot of. So when you're trying to build survivability on Pyke, you can't just build these health items as easily as other champions, because you just can't gain any bonus health. And then Death's Dance can feel great as well. Maybe if you verse a little bit more AD because it gives armor, but also being able to stay alive and not get one shot as easily, and then getting that health regen after you find and execute can feel really good on Pyke. But these are going to be, the 5th and the 6th items typically. Okay, I think that is the optimal item setup for Pyke. Stack those lethalities, and then in the very end, you can consider those other more AD-centric items. Let's talk about the utility item build quickly. And now this, we're once again going to start with Relic Shield. And here we can choose between Merc Treads and Lucidity Boots. Merc Treads is so that you can stay alive. We've talked about that being a weakness of his. And if he gets locked down in one shot, then Merc Treads can go a long way in preventing that. I don't think you would ever need Tabis to keep yourself alive. Typically, AD is burst and sustained damage. It's not a lot of lockdown, and you can get out before you get one shot. So Merc Treads isn't necessarily about the magic resist, but more about the tenacity. Otherwise, we know how good Lucidities can be for Pyke. And then Umbral Glaive, it's just such a broken item. Even if you're trying to opt into the pseudo-tanky utility build, giving up Umbral is just far too much of a price to pay for Pyke. And the mythic for this one is going to be Even Shroud. Now, this is going to give you a little bit more tankiness with the armor, with the magic resist. And it's also quite a strong passive. You might have noticed some champions, even in other roles in jungle, like Sejuani or like Hecarim, this item's popping up a little bit. It's very affordable and cost efficient. And you can proc it quite reliably. With your Q, with your E, you can boost other teammates' damage. And so this is where the utility aspect comes in. Now, your execution range is going to be lower, your W move speed, your E stun, all of that. We're not going to get that lethality stacking, but this can be kind of a decent plan B alternative to the lethality build. And then we can build Frozen Heart. Now, the reason that Frozen Heart is so good on Pyke is because he can make use of all of its stats to its full extent, as it doesn't give any bonus health, which would then be converted to AD. He can get that cooldown reduction, he can get that mana pool, he can get that slowing of the enemy's auto attacks, which can be very useful. And then in terms of trying to be as tanky as possible in the end, again, that Maw is going to be a great defensive item for Pyke to stay alive. And then I just chucked Deadman's in here at the end because we're going to be lacking a little bit of mobility. Again, if we're not stacking that lethality for the W move speed, if we're not having Yomu's for that out of combat movement speed, then Deadman's can be, it can feel quite nice if we're not going to be stacking lethality. So I just want to summarize Pyke's builds quickly. We have the Halo Blaze and lethality stacking, which is probably optimal, although it has a lower margin for error. It is hard to execute. You get one shot quickly. This has a much higher ceiling, and it is for people who are confident on the champion. The Glacial Rune Tree path, the Aftershock Rune Tree, the utility item build path, these can be good band-aids for learning the champ. Maybe you can play some norms or in flex or on a smurf, and just give yourself a little bit of leeway in terms of finding your engages. Because if you're trying to learn the champ and you just get one shot the whole time, not only are you going to probably get less practice, but you're also likely to lose a bit of confidence, get a little bit frustrated. And so you can consider this. Now, we might not get a good feel of how the lethality is going to interact with our kit. Maybe we're not going to find executes nearly the same, but in terms of just playing around with his kit and with the champion, this can be a decent alternative. Okay, we're going to jump into Pyke's combos soon, but before we get stuck into that, I just want to quickly talk about his ability order. What you want to do is you want to start Q level 1, and then E level 2, W level 3, max Q first, max E second. There are some instances where you can consider E level 1, although they are kind of rare. I would say in some invades, if you have information on the enemy team looking to invade, then you can get like a 5-man E stun. Another situation where you can consider taking E level 1 is if you fish for a 2-man E stun. So maybe you can picture yourself cheesing in this bush at level 1, and then the enemy team is coming back from a leash, and then you can find a double E stun, which can do quite a lot. But for the vast majority of games, we want to start Q. Now let's jump into the combos, and there are going to be a lot of combos. He is a very combo-centric champion. He has a very high skill ceiling. Normally what I do for the combos section of my champ guides is to keep it to combos that are very likely to be used in-game. Now, the thing with Pyke is that you can use all of these in-game, so I'm going to cover most of the possible combinations that I am aware of with Pyke. And I'm going to talk about each of his abilities in order in terms of what you can look to do to maximize them. So let's start with Q, and the first thing you really need to get the hang of with Pyke's Q is how long you can channel it before it swaps from a slow into a flip. And so if you press it instantly, that's where it does damage instantly and slows, whereas if you hold it in, then it's going to start flipping the enemy away. And there is going to be a certain amount of time that you can hold until it does become a flip, and you really need to ingrain this into your muscle memory. And just for a visual, it's going to look something like this, like that time. Maybe a little bit quicker if you're right onto it, but just give that a go. The next thing that you can do with your Q is to use it as a slow to land your E. And so if you picture this as an enemy running away, you don't want to necessarily have to try and land that Q on him, and you wouldn't want to have to try and land the E with him out being slowed or anything. And so you can just walk up to them and then slow them with the Q and then land the E, and then they can't really dodge out of it. The same logic can be applied to landing your ult. What you can do is, if they're just out of execute range, or if you don't want them to dodge it, you can just Q them and then ult. And so we can also add an E onto this initially, right? Maybe there's a pretty low enemy, you want to get that high percentage execute off, you can do this, E forwards, Q them, and then ult them. Okay, next up we have Q into R, and then the reason that this one is important is because they're not going to have time to flash your ult if you displace them and then you instantly ult afterwards. And so you need to get a feel of how far the displacement of your Q goes so that you can land that ult without messing it up, right? And for this you can actually buffer your R, so you can throw out your Q then immediately press R, and then after your Q is done, your ult will go out immediately. You can also Q flash, and this can be helpful to quickly execute a target who still has flash and you don't want them to get away, or to get that surprise execute range. Maybe you can Q flash and then ult. Okay, moving on to his W, and you can use W after you're channeling your Q just to instantly cancel it. And sometimes this is going to be a lifesaver. You don't want to necessarily wait for this Q to expire because it's going to slow you down. You also don't want to throw it out because then you get stunned in that whole duration. Maybe you really need to just get out quickly. So you see a bunch of enemies coming, then you just press W, you can get out. What you can also do in the bot lane is, this is pretty specific, but you can hide your levels with your W. Maybe you are just before level 6, and then you press W as a minion dies, you tick from level 5 to level 6, and now you have that ult, which they might not expect, they might not play around. Now what Pyke's W does is it makes him camouflaged, and it gives him movement speed. And so we really want to make use of both of those elements, right? So now let's talk about how to maximize the movement speed part of his W. So the way that his E works is that as it starts a projectile, and then as far as you travel, that projectile is going to catch up to you. And so the more distance you can cover with your E, then the more you can get done with that spell. And so logically, what we would want to do with our W in some situations is to use it after pressing E. So E and then W, and then we get that speed, and then we can stun further distance. We can also use sweeper and then press W so that we can cover more ground with sweeping. It's the same with our umbral. Let's say our umbral triggers on a ward, and then we can use our W to maximize how much vision we can sweep up with the umbral blade as well. In terms of making use of its camouflage, what we can consider is using it after an execute to get out, if we're not planning to get heaps of kills. And so maybe there's just one low target, and so we're going to jump in, we're going to execute, and then we're going to W and just get out of there and try and survive. The last use of W that I'm going to talk about is Wing after E into flash to kind of hide your stun and make it really surprising for an enemy. And so let's compare and contrast these two E initiations. Here, we're going to E forward and then W. Okay, they have plenty of time to react. They're going to use their mobility. They're going to flash. But here, if we E into the wall and then W and then flash, they pretty much have no time to react to that at all, right? And so that can be a huge deal. And so what I did there is I pressed E to initially start that projectile. So when you press E, there's a delay before it catches up to you. And so I don't want my delayed projectile just sitting out in the open for the enemy to see. So I start the projectile with my E, and then I W for that move speed, and then I flash. And so then the projectile is just, it's so quick that it's very, very hard to react to, right? So we're just going to do it one more time here. Into the wall, W, and then flash. Very hard to react. Now, the most common mistake I see with Pyke's W is just using it randomly. Let's say, here's your ally, here's the enemy, they're taking a trade, and then you'll just kind of like W to just get there a bit faster. But again, we really want to make use of the mobility that it provides. And so what we should do instead is we can either just like EW and then use that move speed to help land our E, or we can just not use it at all. So maybe we can just, fish for that Q, and then if they start to get away, then we can chase with our W afterwards. So just using it randomly is the main thing that you want to avoid. You can definitely use it out of base to move a bit faster, but try to avoid using it just completely randomly. Use it to set up the rest of your spells, use it to extend your E or your sweeper or your umbral area, things like that. Okay, moving on to Pyke's E, and we've already talked a little bit about it in terms of the projectile that takes a while to travel towards you. And so what we want to do is get used to a slow E flash. Now, let's compare these two E flashes, okay? Here's the first one. So much time for them to react. Here's the second one. Practically no time to react, right? And so this is the slow E flash, so that you have the highest chance for them to not react or just to flash prematurely, and then they waste their flash. Now we're going to tie that initial combo just with a channeling Q as well. So here's the E flash, and then here is the EQ into flash. E channel Q, and then you can still cast your Q during your E. So this is something that players never expect, and with the release of this video, more players might play around it. So we'll just do that one more time. You can channel your Q during your E, flash, and then run to the other side of them, flip them back to where you want them to go. And when you are doing this combo, please make sure that you walk to the other side of them in time. So what we wouldn't want to do is kind of like EQ flash and then, flip them away to safety, or EQ flash and then we just don't get to the side of them and we waste our Q. Just get used to this jump and practice tool. The next thing for E is you can use walls to extend its range. Let's do another compare and contrast here. So have a look at this E and how far it travels. And now let's have a look at a normal E. It is vastly different, right? It's a lot longer. And what is happening here is when you cast any kind of mobility or any spell that can't land in terrain, you cast it in terrain, but just over halfway, the terrain pushes it outwards. And so this is what's happening here. I'm casting it just past halfway, and then it's going to extend the E range. If I cast it too short, if I try to do this, this is less than halfway, it's just going to push me back into this side of the wall. That is how this ward is even possible. But you can really use this mechanic with this E to min-max a lot. Let's say you're coming out of base, and instead of just like Eing from fountain, what we can do is use our E to jump over this, right? And so if we wanted to get the most distance out of our E getting pushed by terrain, we wouldn't want to use it here. We'd want to use it even a little bit earlier. And so then we'd get the absolute maximum range of it. And so you can really use this in any situation, right? Even, let's say you're just going through an inhib. You want to get it just past the halfway range. Just past the halfway range like that, and then it'll get extended literally on any terrain ever. And you can really get some pretty extended E's if you play around with this. Like that. Okay, the next combo is going to be used every time you build Prowlers. Very important. What you want to get used to is E into Prowlers. And the Prowlers is going to push you through your target. And what that means is that your E almost becomes a point and click stun, which is amazing for Pyke to set up the rest of his spells, to set up that execute. Whereas his Q, his E, his R are all skill shots, this Prowler's interaction is so important for Pyke. And of course what you can do with your E is to extend it for your ult. But what that also means is that if it's not an execute, it can become an engage spell, right? Let's say there are a bunch of enemies here, they're all full health, but you can E into ult, and then the stun is going to catch all of them. And so basically there are a lot of ways to extend the range that your E can cover. You can E and then Prowler, you can E and then Flash, you can E and then W, you can E and then ult, and you guessed it, you can do a combination of those as well, and that's when it's going to get really tricky. And so if we were to combine all of those into one, which is possible, it would look something like this. But I'm not sure how many times this situation would pop up in your games, but just keep in mind that any tool that you can use to extend the distance you travel is going to synergize with your E. Another thing you can do with your E and your ult is to E away and then ult in, so that you're not exposed to getting locked down or getting damaged. And so in this situation, if we want to stun them, if we want to land our ult, we wouldn't necessarily want to like E forwards and then ult, because then they could damage us. What we could do is E away for a little bit of space and safety, and then ult, get the damage and still get the stun redirect. Now this is something that you can use in a lot of your Pyke games, E into the flash predict. Now everyone should have a reasonable idea that Pyke is really scary, and when Pyke suspiciously E's forwards, he's going to look to flash, right? And so then we can start to get fancy and predict mobility, predict flashes. So let's say we suspiciously E forwards on someone, and then we're going to predict their flash, and then they flash here, and you know, we stun them as well. However, this EQ flash that I mentioned is so rare that it pretty much doesn't require you to predict anymore. And so what goes through a player's mind when they see a Pyke EQ forwards, it's like they want to try and dodge the Q, right? But then you flash, you get the stun, and then they're like, oh, I didn't know you could even do that. Because normally Pyke is going to E forward and then try to land that Q, and then they want to try and flash the Q projectile. Okay, let's move on to Pyke's ult. And I'm going to start this by just talking about how it actually works. So wherever you press R, that is going to be the middle of the X. And whenever you hit someone with your ult, you're going to appear in the middle of the X. So if I ult the target dummy like this, I'm going to end up here. If I ult the target dummy like this, I'm going to end up on the other side. And so what's going to separate a good from a great Pyke is making the most of not only the dash portion of his ult, ending up where you want to end up, but also the full hitbox of the ult as well. And so let's say we want to execute this target, we just kind of ult him. What a great Pyke will do, will have the R hit both of them, right? So that you execute the first one, and then you get a bunch of damage on the second one, so that you can get them in execute range again. So really try to min-max the hitbox of Pyke's ult for those multi-kills. Now in terms of min-maxing where you want to end up, let's say you're really low and you want to execute an enemy. And so instead of just ulting on top of them and then getting into tower range, we can ult them so that the middle of the X is outside tower range, but the hitbox still hits them, right? And so we can do something like that. Execute them, not take any tower shots. You can also use his ult hitbox to travel over walls. And so let's say your E is on cooldown, there's a bit of a skirmish in the Dragon Pit and you really need to get out, what you can do is just ult so that the middle of the X is on the outside, and then you can kind of travel over the wall like that. If you want to take this just one step further, we can just imagine that the enemy starts out here and then we queue them into that ult, right? And so this is going to be very hard to replicate, but let's say once again you don't have your E up, you only have very limited time to escape, and what you're going to do is pull the enemy and then ult away. Now this isn't necessarily a combo, but Pyke's ult is an absolute game changer. You can either get that pentakill or you can just waste it and be completely useless in a skirmish. And so it's very important to keep track of important cooldowns, keep track of champions' flashes, and if they have stopwatch or Zhonya's or not. Because if they do versus if they don't, it can swing the entire result of the fight. You can also flash in the middle of your ult. And so this might seem silly, but there are going to be uses for when you want to initiate your ult and then flash away meanwhile, and then your ult will redirect you to where you want to go. The most common example of when this would be relevant is if you're extremely low and you want to flash away to buy yourself some distance so that you can get the execute before dying. Maybe you're flashing a skill shot, or maybe you're flashing out of melee range of a melee champion. For the sake of argument, let's just picture this is Dr. Mundo, and we're exceptionally low and he's in execute range and he has his Q up. And so if we ult and then we get Q'd, we're going to die, we're not going to kill him, right? But if we ult and then flash the Q, and then we'll get that execute. And if you find yourself in this close quarters situation and you want to get that surprising stun, we can use that E mechanic again. So let's say we're just like in the middle of everyone and we want to stun people afterwards. We can E away, get that execute, and then look for some stuns afterwards. And of course, this can apply to Prowlers and to Flash. I don't really want to show every situation. And that's a bit of a segue into something that I actually forgot to mention with your E, is that you can kind of stun in right angles if you're really proficient with it. So normally trying to stun all three of these with an E, it's pretty much impossible, but if we can redirect it. So we get the E and then the projectile's going to come this way, and then we're going to flash, so the projectile kind of follows us at the last second and then gets all three of them. That took me a few goes, but definitely possible. And so you might just be starting to see how many possibilities there are with Pyke. The sky is the ceiling for this champion. We could include a Prowler's Claw in there, we could include an ult in there to get more maneuverability and more dashes and everything, but I hope you get the idea. The last one I want to show for this concept is just ER into flash. And so we'll just start a bit further away. We're going to E in, ult forwards for that dash, and then flash redirect, just so that you can get a visual. There we go. Okay, so those are all the combos that I'm going to go over for Pyke. It might seem like a lot, it is a lot, but at the end of the day, the best Pyke, just like any other champ, will make use of his whole kit to the maximum. Okay, let's move on to Pyke's early game, and I want to provide you guys with a solid foundation in terms of how to approach Pyke's early game. Now, he is the best level 2 champion in the game, in my opinion, definitely the best support. He has insane kill threat at level 2. He's also really good at roaming, and he's really good at finding these all-ins. The first thing to note for this game is I am going to be controlling mid-bush, and having control of mid-bush allows me to pretty much guarantee hitting level 2 first. And so I'm going to control mid-bush. I have sweeper to ensure that this is in fog. Me pressuring from mid-bush means that the first wave's ranged minions of us are going to be very hard for the enemy to damage. And so if the enemy ADC tries to damage the ranged minions, they're going to be quite extended. I can look to trade on them. So control mid-bush, save your relics for the second wave melees, and then the two-step process. So for those of you that don't know, the two-step process is just a useful tool to help you find kills. And so you engage, the first step is you engage and you chunk them, and then you cut the trade pretty quickly, and then on your next engage you commit to the kill. And we're going to see that play out plenty of times. And so here I'm happy to take a short, concise trade. This is the first step of a two-step process. I'm happy to, soften the Bard up. I do have my passive to remain pretty healthy. And now when we do hit level 2, Bard is going to be that much easier to kill if I do decide to go for the Bard. And so notice how I don't go for an all-in. I am going to hook him, and then I'm going to find 1 or 2 autos. One auto just in this situation. If I just continue to chase him, I'm going to get chunked. I'm going to lose that pretty heavily. So short, concise trade, and then set yourself up for that all-in later. Now, this was a game where I was testing Glacial. I would run Halo Blades in the future, but you can see I am pressuring from Fog. This is very important for engagers and for Pyke as well. He needs to pressure from Fog so that I can't get poked out easily, right? If I'm standing over here or if I'm standing over here, they would find windows to auto-attack me, and also they would see my spells coming from a mile away if I start to channel my hook from vision. Otherwise, here's the second wave. I'm going to use my relics on the second wave melees, as I was saying. I'm going to look to execute them when they are around half HP to shove as quickly as possible and get that surprise level 2. And now here is why Pyke is broken. He can just E forwards and look for a Q. And so it's very, very hard to deal with this, right? They are pretty close to their tower, but it's very hard to be safe from Pyke's all-in. And so here I have a couple of options. I could E, Q, and then flash like I showed in combos. However, Kai'Sa has cleanse. And so she just cleanse my stun and then potentially flash my Q. So instead, I'm just going to look to E and then Q her. I could also look for the Bard, but finding all-ins on the enemy ADC much more valuable than the support. And so I force her flash, and then we're going to look to crash this wave. And then I want to freeze. I want a long lane state so that we can find windows to all-in. I don't want to just constantly be shoving minions and then donating them waves to farm under tower. Especially early on in the game, I want to be looking to dominate 2v2 as hard as possible and set up those freezes. Now, when the game does become later, and we will go over this, but freezes are going to get worse as the game goes on when, you know, neutrals are on the map. Okay, so I'm pinging for my ADC to not shove this wave. I'm communicating what I want, very important. And now I know that the ADC has no flash, and so it's just a matter of time, right? Normally what you would see is on the following wave, on this wave, it's going to stack, and then it's going to push up, and it's going to be around here. Then they have to extend really far up in the lane, and then I can kill them. However, Pyke has insane 2v2 kill threat, and so I can almost kill them when they're by their tower. Okay, so now just picking my moment. I'm staying in fog. I know that Kai'Sa wants to look to last hit this cannon, and so then I'm just going to punish. I don't even have to use flash in this situation. I'm going to E forwards, and then the back end of it is going to catch her. I just Q for the slow. She's just dead, right? This is very replicable. Every step that I have done, you guys can do, and you will see done again. But let's keep going. We're going to shove wave, and then we're going to look to base, and let's skip forwards a little bit. Okay, so we're pathing out of base. We crash bot wave. It is going to push into us, and here is a window where you have time to impact around the middle of the map. There's no point in me pathing towards bot immediately because it's the next wave that is going to build and then start to push out towards us. You can see that they are just last hitting here. And so what would happen is if they were hard shoving this wave, then I could consider coming back and trying to hold the freeze, although I probably wouldn't be able to do so 1v2 anyway. And so a good rule of thumb with Pyke is to path out of base gate and pressure around the middle of the map, and then move back down bot on the following wave. And we're going to see Pyke's potential to impact around the middle of the map and to roam right now. So I'm staying in fog. They can't see me. I'm pressuring around here. I'm linking up with my jungler as well, and then they kind of show up, and we're always going to win a skirmish like this. I'm so mobile. I have so much setup, and so we're going to get a free kill there. I can potentially look around mid. You know, I can sweep around this area. It's very important to have sweeper on Pyke as well, so that you can be in fog, so that you can be a fog warrior. This is a concept that I talk about. Being a fog warrior, pressuring between mid and bot, in river, in fog. Okay, and now we're going to have a look at that bot wave I was talking about. It has started to stack up, and so now I'm just going to move down here. I'm going to be around bot, and I'm going to ensure that they can't crash this wave. I'm going to hold the freeze. I'm going to deny. You can see how much pressure I have, how far back they actually have to play. And so now it's going to be about maintaining the freeze and looking to be a fog warrior. And if they ever step up, I'm going to be more than comfortable in jumping forwards and killing them. And so this is the win-win situation where I'm holding a freeze. If they step up, they die. If they don't step up, they lose minions. And so eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift from holding the freeze here into being a fog warrior between mid and bot. And so then me being in fog in the bot river, it turns out that on this window I actually am not in fog, so I could look to pink here. But if they can't see me, if bot river is in fog, then I can pressure roaming towards mid, I can pressure roaming towards bot, and then both lanes have to play safe. And if they don't, I am more than capable of killing either one. So it turns out that my mid laner dies over here, and so I'm not going to look to pressure around mid. I'm more so just going to be still in bot river, but maintaining a freeze and looking to kill the Kai'Sa if she ever walks up. And so we're developing a huge ADC lead here. And so because Pyke has so much 2v2 kill threat, I don't really need a second invitation to look for an all-in. And so I E forwards, and then I try to predict her juke, but she uses her E to gain some move speed and dodge it. And then I just land the Q on the back end. So I'm trying to, at least she's juking away from safety. And then I'm just going to land my Q. And this is the difference between, you know, a good Pyke and a bad Pyke. Can you land that Q or not? If you can, it's a kill. If you can't, it's not a kill. But then all I'm doing is I know their only option is to try and kill me. And so I'm placing a pink down. I'm using my sweeper to make sure that I'm in fog, and then my passive can regen myself up, and then it's just a pretty straightforward double kill. And then we're going to shove the next wave. We're going to crash the next wave, and then it's just going to be rinse repeat, right? I can once again base, spend my money, heal up, come out of base, pressure around this area, look to punish on the following bot wave. Straightforward. Okay, let's move on to the next example. And in this game, I am versus Caitlyn and a Lux, and so I opted in for an aftershock because what I don't want to happen is to E forwards, find a Q, and then just get bound and trapped in one shot. But it's going to be a lot of the same things. I'm going toward mid bush. I am going to go sweeper. I'm going to posture to control it. I know how strong Pyke is, level 1. And so for this one, having a strong blueprint is so important. I know that I am stronger level 1, and so I'm not going to allow myself to get bluffed. Either they respect it and I get level 2 and I look for a level 2 all-in, or they disrespect it and I'm going to kill them. Okay, so I know that they warded here, so I'm waiting until my sweeper is up to start to control mid-bush. And then I see them getting a little bit too confident. This is too much. I know that it's too much. Now it just comes down to, can I land this hook or not? And so I land it. Guess what happens next? We win, right? So I'm just going to chase her down, going to kill her without having to use my flash or anything. And then Pyke's Q is a pretty short cooldown, to be honest. And so Caitlyn starts to try to damage too much on the back end, and then I'm going to walk forward with my next Q, predict a juke. Once again, good Pyke lands the Qs, bad Pikes don't, so just, you know, practice it. Get confident, get comfortable, learn the juke behaviors of your opponents. And so then I get another huge chunk on the Caitlyn. And then she ends up dying. And so guess what we're going to do? We're going to shove wave, we're going to base, we're going to rinse repeat, we're going to come out of base. And in this situation, I'm a little bit more enticed to run straight to bot. This is quite a volatile bot lane matchup. When we were versus the Kai'Sa and the Bard, I had a little bit more freedom to pressure around mid. And what Caitlyn and Lux, or like Caitlyn and Karma, champs like that, what they can do is hard shove. And so I really want to make sure we hold the freeze. I really want to focus on snowballing bot. And this is the strength of Pyke. He can make decisions. He can pressure around mid more. He can pressure around bot more. I'm deciding to really accelerate bot. And so what's going to happen here is I am going to go fishing for a Q, and I'm going to miss. And so there's not much more to be said here. I'm looking for a Q. I predict a juke here. She doesn't juke here. It happens. I am not going to let it affect my confidence. And here I want you guys to think about taking bone plating IRL. I have 3 stacks of bone plating. Just one of them is going to fall off with this miss, and it's so important as Pyke to not be deterred, to be psychotic, to be confident, to keep looking for these opportunities. And so we're going to see what I mean here. I missed that one. It's fine. It happens. Another opportunity is going to present itself, and I'm going to pull the trigger right away. I'm going to EQ and then flash on top of her so that she just can't react at all. We're going to get a kill there. My movements and my decisions are still very confident. I'm hanging around to kill the Caitlyn with my second Q. And then that's exactly what happens. And then we're going to look to shove and then base, and then I can look to either pressure around mid or come right back bot. Okay, and so we're going to skip forwards a little bit here. This is a very bot-centric game. I really want to snowball bot, and so a lot of my decisions are going to be around the bot lane here. And now, since Pyke's Q is such a high threat, you can be creative with it, right? You know the enemy is pressured to do something about it, to juke, or to flash, or to use their dash. And so here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the ADC, and then just predict her E. And then we get a chunk, we get her cleanse. Unfortunately, my ADC just kind of gets one shot. But you can be confident, and you can be creative with your Q. And then just another point on the back end here. Once again, we can see Pyke's short cooldown on his Q come into effect here. I do find another hook. And now I am waiting for my E. I'm not randomly using my W here. I really want to look to use my E and then extend the stun's range with my W. So I E and then I W. And then I'm very close to stunning her. If I stun her there, then I get the hook, and then it's a very easy kill. That could make all the difference at the end of the day. Okay, so skipping forwards, I'm going to look to crash the next bot wave and then find a base and look to pressure the map once again. So we're just going to skip past this a little bit. Path towards mid, out of base. I want you guys to experiment for yourselves. Try out roaming mid. Try really emphasizing bot lane with your roams. And just feel like when doing one thing feels better than the other. Maybe it's to do with wave states, maybe it's to do with compositions, but he does really have a lot of pressure to be playing around mid and to be playing around bot. And so I'm eventually going to move back down bot on the next bot wave. And then once again, we're going to be proactive, we're going to be ambitious, we're going to be psychotic, and I'm going to go fishing. And I miss my Q, it happens, who cares? I still have one more bone plating on my confidence, so this isn't going to, I'm not going to let this affect me at all. And so the next time that I find an opportunity, I'm going to look to pull the trigger. And so here's a great example of how much threat Pyke has. They're practically stuck under their tower. You can even look for windows to E forwards. And here, I felt like I shouldn't go for the Caitlyn because I know that she has E, and I feel like the Lux is a little bit out of position. So then I throw out the hook on the Lux, we get her flash, we get a big chunk. Once again, be proactive and test your limits and figure out what you can and can't get away with. And the only way you're going to be able to learn that, apart from, a few tips and tricks from this video, is testing out yourself. Overstep the boundaries, make a mistake, and then learn from them. The last point for this game is we're just going to have a look at Pyke trying to disengage. And now he's not the greatest disengage champ because his hook displaces the enemy, right? So if a jungler is ganking and then I try to hook the jungler, I'm just going to pull him closer. And so you need to be creative when you want to disengage. Here's an example of that coming up. I'm pressuring really hard, bot, and then we notice the jungler collapsing, and so I don't want to just kind of hook him here, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use my E and then create a path that the Hecarim can't move through, and then I can use my Q on the back end to appropriately disengage for my ADC. Okay, so the actual last point for this game, be a psycho. Who cares if you make mistakes? Just learn. The sky is the limit for this champion. And so I'm getting pretty creative. I'm getting pretty confident here. I find a window to move behind Infog through here, and then Caitlyn's kind of caught napping. I force her flash, and now I want to see if we can, get a couple kills here. And so I ult to kill the Lux, and then I miss my ult. Who cares? There's just so much potential that this champion can have. And so I'm really trying to not cherry pick all of my plays. This wasn't very clean. I've shown you a bunch of Q misses. It's part and parcel of the Pyke experience. So on that same point, we're going to go back to the first game, and then we're going to look at what this champion can potentially achieve if you do learn his limits. And so here, what you can do with your Q is you can be patient on it, right? I don't want to instantly fling every time. Sometimes they're going to have to juke around. Sometimes you can just kind of get in their head, feel out their movement, and then once you feel like you have a good shot, then you can throw it. So many different things you can do with your Q as long as it's confident. As long as you're not just holding your Q because you're scared to throw it out. Okay, and so obviously we're extremely aggressive over here. Practically tower diving between their towers, 2v2. And I'm just going to go for it. And once again, the sky is the limit. Feel out what you can and can't achieve. Here, the stopwatch is going to come into play. I mentioned that a well-used stopwatch can be so incredibly impactful. And so I'm not going to just let this Kai'Sa get away with it. I know that I just forced her flash earlier. And so I'm going to flash, even though she has claims, I'm going to slow her with my Q afterwards. I'm going to go into Zhonya's. And then we're just going to, get another kill. Okay, so we're going to move forward a little bit here. And we're still in the early game. However, it's 12 minutes in. The game is, getting later. I don't want to emphasize freezing bot and camping bot too much. The map is starting to open up a little bit more. Objectives are on the map. I want to be able to use my roaming potential as well. And so windows, I would say between the 8 and the 14 minutes mark, you can be more flexible. You can roam with your jungler. You can kill mid a little bit more often. Even sometimes you can move top. You do have a lot of mobility with your W. So just to reiterate, in the first 8 minutes of the game, it's generally more appropriate for you to look to freeze and accelerate bot. However, we do have those windows to pressure around mid like I showed. And then 8 to 14 minutes, you want to be a little bit less tied towards bot lane and be more fluid on the map. I just want to show another point of execution here. So the TF ult sees me. However, Pyke has so much threat that sometimes it just doesn't even matter, right? I'm going to W to run forwards. I'm going to E, and then I either land this Q or I don't, right? Am I a good Pyke or am I a bad Pyke? And I landed this one. And so I just want to talk about this Q quickly. This was a prediction on the TF's juke, but normally how people are going to juke is they're going to juke this way, and then they expect a hook, and so this is just kind of mind game. This is by playing a lot of Pyke, throwing a lot of Qs out, missing a lot of Qs, feel out those limits and learn from them. And then we end up just getting a kill on the back end. I'm just going to do a short Q to slow him. Okay, next game, same concepts. Even though I have an Israel who has low wave clear and who has a pretty weak all-in, I'm still going to do the same thing because Pyke is so strong at doing what he wants to do in the early game, having so much threat that it doesn't really matter. And so I'm going to control mid bush. I'm going to save my stacks. I'm going to look to two-step. I noticed that they're just a little bit too far out here, and so I'm going to Q. I have hob this time, so you can notice how much damage I can do in the initial step of that two-step process. I've softened them up. I've pretty much secured level 2 for us. They ward this. I'm going to sweep it. If they walk up, I'm going to Q them. And so anyway, we get that ward. We get level 2 first. I'm going to have a crack. I'm going to miss this one. It happens. I'm not going to cherry pick the examples. But let's keep going. We know what we want to do from this situation, right? We want to crash the wave and then set up a bounce. And so unfortunately what happens here is my ADC starts damaging the wave. And so for this one wave, it's going to be tricky. We're going to want to crash this wave. And so that's my priority right now. I'm even going to invest my hook to try and bring this cannon here and one-shot it, really crash that wave and get the bounce. Now what would happen if your ADC just never listens to you and constantly shoves? It's going to be awkward for you to look for 2v2 kills. Again, Pyke has so much threat that sometimes you can even find kills around this area of the lane, which is very rare. But if they just perma-shove and you don't really find any opportunities here, you can become a second jungler a lot earlier and then just group up with your mid and your jungle and play around here and become that fog warrior quicker. Ideally, your ADC listens to your pings and eventually set up a freeze, and so that's what's going to happen here. This wave is pushing into us. I pinged my ADC to stop shoving, and we know how much threat Pyke's going to have. I'm just going to speed through this a little bit. Eventually our jungler comes down, and then I can just find a hook into an E, and he's dead. Okay, and so then we're going to shove, we're going to base. Shove base, and then coming out of base, we're going to run towards mid. And so this is a game that I wanted to put a little bit more emphasis on pressuring around mid. First of all, because I have that Ezreal. He is comfortable sitting bot and just Q farming. He doesn't have the greatest, wave clear or all-in as we talked about. Bard, he's also going to be looking to roam, and so I can easily match that. Again, this blueprint for Pyke is very replicable as long as you are able to execute on his skill shots. So I'm staying in fog. You can see that they can't see me this whole time. Being creative. I am playing around there being a ward somewhere around here potentially. It's very common, especially versus support like this, for people to want to get some vision around here. So I'm being creative. I'm fogging on top side, and then I notice Silas go in, and then I get to pull the trigger. And so unfortunately, he gets his flash off before my E stun can land. However, that's great, right? Mid laner chunked, and he has no flash now. And then I find a little bit of damage on the Bard as well. We're just going to speed it up a little bit. I get pushed out by the enemy Kazakhs. And so it's hard for me to kind of face check this area and regroup bot. So we're just going to jump forwards now. Okay, so this is coming off of a base timer. And again, I'm going to be pathing towards mid. That is what I decided for this game is going to be a little bit more appropriate in terms of generating a win condition through mid. Trying to stay in fog. I notice Silas is around here. Unfortunately, I don't have my W. And so I'm just going to hang around mid and potentially move back bot. Although I know with that earlier play, we did force the mid laner's flash. Bard shows up, and then there's going to be a bit of a fight around here. And again, am I going to land the Q or not? That's going to be the difference at the end of the day. So I predict the juke, I land the Q into the E, and then the rest is history. We're just going to get the kill on the mid laner. Awesome. And so I'm starting to carry the mid lane, right? I forced the mid laner's flash. I have helped my mid laner get prior. We've got another kill here. So just emphasizing, Pyke has options. He has different ways to create win conditions. This is going to be through mid, through jungle, or is it going to be through bot? Okay, jumping forwards again. You can see that I'm still emphasizing mid. I want to shove mid. I want to get pressure. I want to play in fog. I'm being a fog warrior here with my mid and my jungle. And either their mid and their bot plays extremely respectfully, and then they're just going to bleed, right? We're going to get plates. We're going to get all the camps, all the objectives. Eventually, someone has to step up, and then I'm going to be ready to pounce. This is just overwhelming pressure for the enemy team to try and contend with. You can see how scared they have to play from all of this fog of war. My mid laner finds a window to jump on the enemy ADC and collect a kill. And now I'm just going to be on the prowl, pretty much. Am I going to find a pick here? Am I going to find a pick here? It's just impossible for the enemy to play when you're so oppressive, linking up with your teammates in fog, creating pressure. So for this example, I just want to show the power of Halo Blades. finding that execute threshold on your ult a little bit quicker. And so Bard, he steps up too far. Pretty much if he steps outside of his fountain, it's too far at this point. But I find the Q, I find the Halo Blades autos, and then an easy execute. And so plays like this are not going to be easy to see. The pressure you generate from being in fog is not easy. It's not tangible, right? But it is so important that you do remain in fog on these roam windows. Because your perspective, you're just kind of walking around, but their perspective, understanding what they are going through when they just cannot move anywhere on the map is so big. So just taking stock of this game, my mid laner and my jungler are happy. I've accelerated my mid lane. My Israel has gotten free farm and pressure, and so he's going to be really happy for the mid to late game. And so generally for this game, I have created a couple of win cons and I'm happy. And that is Pyke's job. At the end of the day, his kit is so tailored towards early pressure that if you fail to create any win cons, you are not doing your job. You're going to be a liability to your team. And so you need to make sure that you find and you generate win cons, you use your early strengths. Okay, we're going to get into some more examples just so you can see how replicable this is as a blueprint for Pyke. So we're laning 2v2, and then I have a lot of kill threat. So here's my jungler. I'm going to greed with my Q because I know she's dead, and then I can find another hook, and then we get a couple of kills. Awesome. Shove wave, base. And in this game, we have a Vigar versus a Corki. And so this is much less of a volatile mid lane. The other game, it was Ari versus Silas. More heavy trading, more brawling, more low range. Here, this game, I'm not going to be spending too much pressure and time around mid. And so I'm going to initially path mid as I do have that window, but then I'm just going to pass straight back down bot. We had that good wave state because the crash wave and it's pushing back into us. I'm going to pressure from fog, and then I'm going to pick my moment. And then I'm either going to land the Q or I'm not, right? It's as simple as that. And so I have my sweeper to pressure from fog. And eventually they're going to overstep. I'm going to pick my moment. So pretty much any time around here, I could look to jump forwards. I think I was hesitating here just a little bit. But here, do I land the Q? Do I not? I landed on the Lux, and then she just gets one shot. Rinse, repeat. And so without showing you the same play a million times, I'm really going to speed this up. Just keep your eye on the minimap here. I am pathing out of base gate, and then I'm pressuring towards bot. And I have such an insane amount of kill threat that I can just get here, and then she has to flash, and then eventually she's going to die. Keep going. Eventually I'm going to get my base off. It really is rinse, repeat, come back down. And now I'm grouping up with jungler just a little bit later into the game. And so in this kind of passage of time, with being with my jungler in bot river, in fog, we know how pressuring that can be. They're Corki. He's kind of shoved down the tower. Very hard to impact that. But we have options, right? We could look to do dragon, we could look to invade, we could look to kill, and I'm going to choose the kill option just because I have so much threat. And so here, this is like, even though it's so telegraphed, I'm running through this pink. If I land my Q, then it's going to work. And so I'm just going to be patient here. I'm going to dodge the Lux's Q, and then I'm going to E forwards for some space, pick my target, find the kill on the Lux. One more example from this game. There's going to be a bit of a skirmish around here. And so this is where knowing the limits on your Q can make all the difference at the end of the day. Understanding how quickly you can release your Q to get the displacement and not just the slow. So what happens here is I'm going to fling the Udyr, but I'm getting stunned, right? And so I buffer my Q just at the right time so I still get the displacement. If I got stunned there immediately, or just in a different situation, I'm sure you can appreciate how important it might be getting that flip off versus not. Okay, so for this game, there are going to be some familiar concepts, and then I'm just going to mention a couple of other things. And so this game, we're deciding to invade. And so what you want to do if you invade is you can start sweeper so that you can invade for as long as you want, and then come back bot and still have sweeper to deny vision of these bushes so you can pressure from fog, and you can look for those confident two steps. Now, Pyke is fantastic at invading. You can take his Q or you can take his E. His Halo Blade is going to do a lot of work. So nothing is going to end up happening from this invade. Obviously, if anyone was caught napping around here, they just die. But I do have my sweeper. And we're going to hang around. We're going to get the red buff. We're going to go back to bot. And then it's going to be much of the same things. Pressure from fog and look to find that two-step. And so Senna's walking a little bit too far up here. I'm going to hook her. I'm going to use my Halo Blades. Get all three procs. And then kind of cut the trade there. I'm going to be chunked. She's going to be chunked. She's softened up for that all-in at level 2 potentially. So we hit level 2, I'm going to E forwards, and then I'm going to find the hook, and then it's just so replicable, right? Now she has no summoners at all. She's severely chunked. We can set up that freeze. No point in showing you another example of this. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to skip forwards. And here I want to talk about the two-step process. So I mentioned that the first step could be to chunking them out, to softening them up for your next engage to kill. What the two-step process can also be is with that first step, you can force important cooldowns. You can force Thresh's Lantern, you can force Lucian's Dash, Ezreal's Dash, Siv's Spell Shield, Morgana's Spell Shield, things like that. Look to engage and then blow that important cooldown, back off, and then the next time you have your cooldown is going to be up before these important defensive spells, because these defensive tools always have longer cooldowns than these playmaking tools. And so let's just see this play out. For example, in this situation, we're going to two-step with regards to Thresh's Lantern. It has a 22-second cooldown. I am going to look to engage, and then I'm going to force out the Lantern. Great. I'm going to back off. And then I know that he has a long cooldown on his Lantern, right? And so now when Senna steps up, I have my spells back up, and then I'm just going to jump on her. Now she's just dead to rights. And so we pick up a couple of free kills over here. So this is a really important concept, though, because a lot of times what players might think is, oh, Thresh has Lantern, I can't kill. But the two-step can really circumnavigate that. Force out those defensive cooldowns and then have a feel for how long of a window you have before it comes back up that you can actually commit to a kill. And so we had a bit of an example versus Thresh that was different from, you know, the mages and the enchanters that we've just been farming on with Pyke. Now, I wanted to show an example of Pyke versus an engager. This is so hard to find. I've played so many Pyke games, and all of the games, pretty much all of the games have just been ranged champions. I just wanted to still show that Pyke is the king of all-ins, and especially if you find a window to engage on the enemy ADC, you should be confident, you should be comfortable, and you should take that opportunity. So this is a game from one of my students, and we can just see how much threat Pyke has in that all-in. It's versus a Kaiser and a Nautilus. The Nautilus is sitting in this bush, and we're going to find a window to all-in, and we're just going to come out ahead. The base damage, the mobility, the threat, it's all just too much. And so when you are, we can just see that we get the kills here. So if you are versus an engager, obviously it's going to be a little bit harder to one-shot them. So those situations where I was just hooking the Lux and killing her, I would more so be aiming for the enemy ADC. But you can still do the same things. You can still pressure the bush. You can still understand that you are the king of level 1. So if they contest, you hook them, you trade, you're going to win that trade. You're going to hit level 2, you're going to all in. Okay, moving on to the mid to late game for Pyke. First, I want to encourage you to check out my mid to late game guide. The link is going to be in the description below. But to summarize, there are 3 main points just for the mid to late in general. Mid first, vision, and pressure. Mid first is where you want to shove mid wave, get a mid ward before you do another play. Vision, 1 mid, 2 quadrant rule. Typically, you want to have 1 mid ward and then 2 wards in a quadrant that you want to control for. And for pressure, you want to link up and pressure with your jungler. Now, there is a caveat to that. For mid first and for vision, we don't want to be doing these things at the cost of opportunities, at the cost of finding a pick. And this is where Pyke excels in terms of finding a pick, having first move, injecting volatility so that he can use his fantastic mobility and his pick potential to find picks and accelerate the game pace, because he really wants a messy, a chaotic pace of game, and you need to take control of that. So for Pyke, it's less about ticking the boxes and more about being opportunistic and being ready to collapse and to create number advantage fights. Pyke is not good at 5v5 front to back. He's not good at like ARAM face-offs. So use your mobility, use your slipperiness to be annoying. Try to squeeze, suffocate the map. Use your Umbral, your Sweeper to make the map dark, and so you always have first move, and then you can really carry the mid to late game. And so that's just a general mentality you want to go into the mid to late game as Pyke. We're going to see some examples of that. And just to define the mid to late game, first of all, when either team has a mid or a bot tower that has fallen, then it is the mid to late game. Then you have more freedom to roam around. You're not really locked into laning phase as much. And so in this first example, we're going to see how I can use my sweeper, be confident to, sit pretty aggressively far up because I am very hard to kill, and be opportunistic. If something does happen towards bot side, I would be there. I would be happy to roam. Otherwise, I'm just suffocating the map, right? This is their vision. They have absolutely nothing here. We have a pink. I've swept this out. I'm sitting in here. I'm warding their shallow jungle. And so it's even a bit of a mission for them to secure their own camps, and then they're just naturally going to bleed out and lose. We just played a little bit more here.
But you can see I am pressuring in fog, I'm controlling, and here I'm emphasizing getting mid prior here, and then I can kind of rinse and repeat. Okay, let's jump forward a little bit. So here we can just see how broken Zombie Ward and Umbral is, and I can, face check this area with quite a lot of freedom. I do have Merc Treads, I have my E, my W, I'm very hard to lock down. Turns out my jungler is here with me as well, so I can just kind of one-shot that, get a Zombie Ward, one-shot that, get another Zombie Ward, and now I'm just going to be... I have the first move, right? I have River Control now. They don't have vision around here. I made sure of that. And then if top lane ever steps up too far, or if mid ever steps up too far, or if they step up around these chokes too far, maybe we can find a pick. And so now it's all about being opportunistic. So I get a ward over here. I'm really suffocating, really squeezing the map. The map is very small for them to play with now, and so it turns out that Jax is a little bit too far up, so we're easily going to collapse on that. It's not necessary for this to happen. I mean, it's going to happen in a lot of games, right? This is Challenger. In other elos, this is going to happen as well. The enemies are going to be overextended. You can collapse on them. If they don't, you're just going to bleed them out. There's no way that the enemy team's going to win if they're all just sitting under their towers and sacking camps and sacking neutrals. So anyway, I have first move. There's no way that this Jax is going to survive. And let's just speed it up a little bit here. So we get a pick on the side. Again, I'm being a fog warrior. I'm making sure that the map is exceptionally dark for them. It's very hard for them to make many decisions. And then, because I realize how dark the map is for them, I make a call that they're probably going to sack topside. Their top laner just died. Their ADC is bot. The map is very dark for them. And so I'm going to base. I'm going to run bot here. And I'm going to try to... keep my rise safe down here. This is just another example of being opportunistic, looking for windows to roam. And I am great at finding opportunities in either side lane. And so I'm going to be here, and I'm going to try and help my rise out. And so they don't expect me to be here. And then, we get a couple picks. And this isn't executed very well. I missed my hook. And then the chase on the back end is a little bit sloppy. She flashes my ult. But this is the type of game pace that Pyke thrives in. Chaotic, having first move number advantages, things like that. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to speed this up a little bit. He's going to die pretty easily. And then it's right back to squeezing the map. I'm in fog. I have my Umbral up again. I'm going to make the map impossible for the enemy team to just freely move around in. And so just as a visual again, this is completely dark and we have great vision, so their options are just so limited. And then it's going to be get mid prior here. There's a bit of downtime here, right? There's no opportunity that I'm giving up, so I may as well get a mid ward here. However, in so many situations, you might not have the time to walk down mid to get a mid ward here. You might want to be collapsing on one of the sides. And so I make a judgment call that they're going to be sacking dragon. And so I'm going to be posturing towards the top side of the map just to make sure they don't get too much here. And so we have a TP here. I'm collapsing, and again, it's not about the execution or the result. It's about playing Pyke's game, having first move, being opportunistic, and squeezing the map for the enemy. Okay, one more example from this game. It's going to be a lot of the same things. I'm making sure that this area is in fog, zombie plus umbral being broken, being opportunistic, making sure that the enemy doesn't step up too far. And if I deem that someone is out of position, I'm going to decisively collapse on that area of the map. This is because not only is it tying into my champion's identity and using my mobility and my pick tools, but also using my first move. I know that I'm going to be there first over their reinforcements, and so I'm just going to pull the trigger. And if all the stars align like this, you just have to be decisive, recognize the opportunity, and capitalize on it. So Jax is just kind of realizing that he's left stranded now. We're going to get a free kill here. And then we're going to translate that to maybe another pick and then Baron, and then the game is just going to kind of right itself. We're going to look briefly at the next game. It's going to be much of the same. And so we got mid prior here. I'm getting that mid ward, and now I'm going to go and squeeze the map and be opportunistic. So zombie plus umbral, clearing out a bunch of wards. It's just so broken how much control and how quickly you can get it. And then if I see someone, I'm going to, decisively pull the trigger on them, get some kills. The last thing for this game I wanted to show is why it is so important to have Prowlers to be able to find that execute and to find that point and click setup. And so here it's just standard E into Prowlers and then just getting them into execute range. And if I don't have E there, then it would be hard to lock them down. Maybe the Hecarim would be enticed to ult away as well. So this is the last game that I'm really just going to emphasize, laying that foundation. Again, I have the control around this area, and so we almost get a pick around here. all of this is just remaining in fog. So from their perspective, it's really hard for them to do anything on the map, right? They just kind of have to sit here, and then if they start to extend too far up here, I'm going to be able to collapse in fog with the first move. And so I look for a quick pick around mid. This would have worked if I landed the Q, and this is, can you land the Q or not? I probably should go for the ADC here, but I do have my bone plating in game and for my confidence for going for plays, so that's totally fine. The play fails, I'm going to shake it off, and then I still have first move, and then I notice that Poppy is just far too extended in the side lane here, and then I get to collapse, and I'm just, eons ahead of the enemy reinforcements. Okay, so I want to show a little bit more in terms of fight execution and really trying to make the most out of your ult. So for this fight, we're going to get an initial pick onto the center, and then I do have my ult reset. And so what you want to do when you have your ult reset, obviously you don't want to just jump in immediately. You also don't want to just completely abandon the fight while there is this potential to just clean up. So you want to be patient but confident in terms of using it to find more resets. So I get the first reset there, and then I'm chasing, I'm posturing, I'm pinging, I want to go in, I want to clean up more. I'm just trying to play on my limits. And I'm still not panicking. I know that how long I still have left on my ult. I'm still holding it, and then right at the end, I get to ult and clean up, and then I can go and fish for another ult on the back end here. Now, this Galio, it turns out he is respecting my ult, but this is a good example of being patient but confident. And so I just want to talk about the situation again. If I mismanage my ult, if I miss my ult, or if I try to ult in afterwards and then I just don't get to execute, it can really turn the whole fight from being a stomp to being stomped. You can go from like a 1v9 penta hard carrying the fight to just whiffing the ult and being the melee minion very quickly. And so there are some cooldowns that you need to keep your eye on as well, right? If you can, ult people when they are CC'd, like in this situation, obviously very high chance of that happening. You want to keep in mind stopwatches, flashes, important cooldowns like that. On the back end here, we saw myself playing around the Rek'Sai ult as well. I know that the Rek'Sai still does have ult, and so I'm not going to just ult now. And so that's an important cooldown to track. There are tools that are going to make people be able to dodge your ult. And so keeping all of these things in mind can be a lot initially, but once you get the hang of Pyke, once you free up a little bit of mental space, once his combos become a little bit more muscle memory, then you can think about stopwatches and flashes. Now, I've talked a little bit about being slippery, being hard to lock down, and playing with confidence. And so I wanted to give an example here of really playing on the limits and showing you what that can achieve. So I'm really hard to lock down, right? I'm mobile, I have my Moby boots, I'm annoying, I have my E. And so let's see what happens. I get hit by the center W, then I'm going to E away, but I'm going to hang around. I know that they don't really have many tools left. I'm trying to buy space and time for my jungler to catch up. I've wasted their time. And I'm trying to play right on the edge between danger and safety. If I step too far forwards, I'm going to die. If I step too far backwards, they're under no pressure. They can just run away quicker. And so I'm really playing on the edge here. I'm enticing them to hang around. I bait out his Q, bait out her W. They're hanging around, and now they're just dead. And I think it's reasonable to say me dancing on the edge here, being in their face, being annoying, but not quite out of position, makes the rest of this play a lot easier. And so then they've just extended too far, and we get to clean up. I get a bunch of kills with my ult. And so it's easy for me to say just dance on the limits, right? How are you going to know the limits? The only way to know the limits is to test the limits and to go over the limits, to make a mistake, and then to learn from them. We can picture a professional tightroper. How do you think that they're going to master the skill of balancing on a tightrope? Do you think they're just going to slowly stand up until they feel their balance, and then suddenly they're not going to fall? They're going to try a bunch. They're going to fall hundreds, thousands of times until they learn the limits of how to balance themselves appropriately. You need to make mistakes. You need to fall over, and then you get back up, and then you know what you can do for the next time. And so in this game, we're pretty much even, and we're going to have a look at, a 5v5 kind of face-off when I can't use my mobility, I can't squeeze the map, and it's just not ideal for Pyke. It's going to feel awkward. You're going to just miss out on execution ranges here and there. You can still try and execute as well as you can in these fights, but it's just going to feel very messy, and we'll see what I mean shortly. So I missed a Q there, unfortunate. But just not having first move, not controlling the pace of the game, you're going to watch your teammates die a lot. Your ult is going to expire. It can feel so close, yet so far at the same time. And so here's another example of that. We don't really have first move. We're going to find brief windows to, move in fog and maybe look for a pick here and there. But when the enemies, start to collapse, and their front line comes along, it's just going to be hard to find all of those resets that you really want. And so then you have to make the decision, like, do I try and execute and clean up, or do I just kind of back off? And it's not a good time for Pyke. And so the onus is on you to accelerate, to generate a win con, to keep your foot on the gas from the early throughout the whole game. Like here as well, we're kind of stuck in our jungle. We want to find a pick, but we just don't quite have the damage because we're behind and they're never really in the execute range. And so when I go over Pyke VODs with my students, this is something that I get a lot of the time. You know, I feel really useless in the mid to late. What am I doing wrong? If you're even or behind in the mid to late, you have already done something wrong. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable if you haven't snowballed and accelerated as Pyke. What you should do is you really need to review your early game and making sure you're playing to your champion's identity. Otherwise, you're just going to have to try and make the best out of a bad situation. Try to execute in skirmishes and team fights as well as possible. You know, you're not going to have the luxury to control, to squeeze, to find number advantages. So then just play really well. Make the most out of your ult executes when you can, and you can still find small windows to collapse on sides. So my main purpose with this guide was to provide you guys a coherent structure with which to play your Pyke games. I didn't want to make a Pyke montage. I don't think that would be the most helpful video for you guys. To watch, you can always search up those Pyke montages on YouTube. There's a huge difference between seeing Pyke being performed masterfully and then slowly building up your skills to be able to, you know, come close to that yourself. However, I do feel that I've been lacking in my guide in terms of providing some mid to late teamfight execution. So even if this is unreasonable for you to replicate at the moment, maybe it can inspire you, or you can see what the limits of this champs could potentially be. Let's get into it. And the first thing I want to mention with this clip is being annoying. Trying to waste the enemy's time, using your slipperiness. And so I'm just going to be annoying around here. I'm going to hang around. I'm going to play on my limits and try to delay and frustrate the enemy as much as possible. Getting right up in his face. I know that I always have my tools to disengage if necessary, and see I'm wasting their time. And you can really like push the boundaries here. See how annoying you can get without getting caught out of position. I start emoting and dancing a little bit. Of course, you can do this as well, but the execution is going to come up now. And so I notice Jin by himself. I'm going to do the E, flash into the Prowlers, and then I'm going to predict his flash and his Gale Force. So we'll just have a look at that one more time, because I know that he has flash and Gale Force still up. And so it's going to look that my combo might be clunky, but I know I just don't have enough damage to put him in execute range before I can ult while he's stunned, right? So he's going to get out of his stun. I know he's going to want to use his mobility. So I pick up that kill initially, and then I'm going to do a fast Q into an E onto the Ashe afterwards. We get a pick there, and now just for this Ashe pick, it might be tempting to ult her here, but I know that if I ulted back in onto the Ashe, then I would just die. So I do have my ult reset, and I could easily execute her, but then I'll just die immediately to the graves afterwards. And so I'm being disciplined here. I know my limits, and I'm going to be hanging around. And so I'm looking to provide something to this fight if I can. You can notice my ult is ticking down and down. And so I want to be able to use it right before it ends, just so I can get some extra value out of it. So I'm going to E forwards, ult onto the rise, travel backwards to get the E stun. And then I'm going to be channeling my Q and walking on this side to flip him back this way. So just a little bit of a, you know, a mini engage in the skirmish. And you can notice my ult cooldown is incredibly low. So this is where the Axiom Arc is going to come into play, right? I got an Axiom Arc ulti reset from these 2 kills already, and it does work. There is a passive timer with your ult, so while you have the reset active, there is still that inbuilt background timer that's going to get reduced by Axiom Arc. And so now I'm waiting for my ult to come back up. I'm going to be annoying on the edges of on the fringes of the fight. My cooldowns come back up. I'm going to execute the rise. I'm going to hang around and look for a window to execute on to the Udyr and then get out. And then we're going to clean up on the back end with a Graves kill as well. Now this was a pretty well executed extended team fight. And if I made just one mistake at any of these windows, if I messed up my ult onto the Jhin, if I ulted back in onto the Ashe and died, if I waited for my ult to fizzle and not get the initiation onto the rise, if I went in too early, if I didn't find an execute, then the whole team fight could go completely differently, right? And this is why Pyke is such an amazing champion. Such a high skill ceiling, and it can be so rewarding when you learn his limits. The difference between a well-executed Pyke and a poorly executed Pyke is night and day. We're going to do something a little bit special for the end of this champion guide. I want to talk about the Pyke Contract. If you decide to play Pyke, learn Pyke, these are points that you need to agree to, that you understand. I understand I need to put in a lot of time to master this champ. This is an exceptionally difficult, punishing, but high scaling champ all at the same time. He is not your typical support champion who you can normally pick up within a reasonable amount of games. You really need to put in a lot of time, a lot of games. I also understand that I need to create win cons early. It's not like you're carrying, it's not like you're playing really well, it's part of your identity. You need to create win cons early. If you fail to do so, you have let your team down. And this plays into the next point. I will not feel entitled to a win from a strong early game. Sure, you got a few win cons from your early game, that's how it should go. You need to keep your foot on the gas. It's not like you've outperformed the enemy support, you're doing a great job, and then you start to, slowly lose, and then it's your team's fault. No, you do not deserve a win just because you got ahead on Pyke early. I will play on and over the limits I'm comfortable with. And this is something that is very important to learn and to improve at anything, but this is so important to learn the limits on Pyke because he has so many limits. This is counterintuitive to most supports potentially. A lot of my students struggle to test limits. And I have personally had a lot of moments where I just have a shocker on Pyke and it hurts my confidence and I get flamed in chat and maybe my reputation is a bit damaged and I'm really hesitant to queue up again and try again, but that is just what you have to do as Pyke. And it's not all doom and gloom. It's so much fun learning, creating new limits for yourself. And when you do make plays and when you do improve, it can be so rewarding. I understand what fights and pace of game I excel in. Now for Pyke, this is very clear. He needs to find those number advantage skirmishes. He needs a fast-paced, chaotic game. He needs to inject volatility, squeeze the map from the enemy. So don't be surprised if you show up in an ARAM face-off that you struggle to perform. And last but the most important point, I will have fun. The only way you're going to be able to stick to Pyke is if you enjoy his playstyle, you enjoy his character, his skills. That will keep you motivated, that will give you some extra stacks on your bone plating each game for your confidence. And it'll also allow you to reach higher heights if you really enjoy what the champ can offer. Pyke is not for everyone, but if you do decide to learn him, he can really open up a whole new dimension of your gameplay. I fell in love with the champion almost as soon as he was released. I barely played any solo queue in 2018 when I was still playing full-time professionally. Pyke came out, I spammed him. In solo queue, I brought him to scrims. I started first picking him in the OPL, and I just had so much agency, so much fun. I'm confident the same can apply to you guys if you understand the Pyke Contract. Next up for my South Island trip, I went to Rob Roy Glacier. Now this was a bumpy road, there were gravel for miles, and I actually had to drive across small rivers, which was the first time for my, small city car. I had to move some rocks around and I tried to find shallow spots, so that was quite a bit of fun. But it was a lovely drive to get to the hike. And then this was the scenery at the start of the walk, so we barely made it out of the car park, and this just really set the tone for the hike. Really beautiful views here. And then at the end of the walk here, this scenery is just amazing. It goes from forestry to a waterfall, to snowy top mountain peaks, and then eventually to a glacier. This was just incredible to see in person. And then since it was summer, there was some ice melting and there were actually mini avalanches that were going on. And this was very humbling in a way. It was deep, powerful and loud in person. And what I did was I just sat on the rock, having a snack and watching this for ages, just being awestruck, honestly. Then I decided to try and climb as high as possible. So I went off track, and we can see down here, that is where the actual end of the track is, and then I tried to climb up. And I stopped when I couldn't climb the slippery gravel anymore. So this was actually quite exhilarating, adding that element of danger going off track. But this is definitely one of my favorite hikes. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my Patreons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. I am streaming 5 days a week now at twitch.tv/cupcakeoce. Come say hi, I would love to see you there.